Welcome to the 3x5 news, views, and reviews, scribble and index cards. We get in and we get out fast, so keep up. Why should you watch me? YouTube is replete with lengthy political conversations. That's not meant to be a criticism because I find those on my favorite channels informative, brilliant even, personally incapable, not to mention uninterested, in speaking at length. I aim to produce succinct analyses. I think you will find them original, surprising, and outside the box. In other words, you won't hear what I have to say anywhere else. Oh, one more thing. I goof around a lot. Let's dive in. A few days ago, I was under the weather, but no worries. In fact, grateful that I had just been inoculated with this season's COVID, flu, and pneumonia vaccines. I was happy to be suffering minor day after side effects. Of course, this year the path to inoculation is clouded with questions, which spurred me to seek some clarity with my health insurance company and the kind pharmacist. Under Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is only allowing the COVID-19 vaccine for those over 65 and those younger with certain health conditions. This year, the pharmacy in New York State that I visited had me sign a form with boxes asking about those two requirements. As for the one that those younger needed to be suffering from certain health conditions, all you had to do was check a box. Thus, for now, at least in New York State, it's a formality. Otherwise, apologies if you expected this to be about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., depicted in the thumbnail to my video. But I just can't. He's too depressing. I am old enough to remember the days that his uncle and father died, the very days, while imperfect, John F. and Robert F. Kennedy were beacons of hope, especially his father. The son, in contrast, is a harbinger of doom. Harbinger? Either way. Doom. Before I return to my own experiences with vaccines, let's revisit the Revolutionary War. At age 19, George Washington came down with smallpox, the more severe version of which had a mortality rate of at least 20%. He survived, but left him with pockmarks, a word which has its origins in the disease. A pock was a blister or pustule, symptoms of the disease that left a scar afterwards. Note that those today who have what is referred to as pockmarks didn't have smallpox, just severe acne. On the plus side for Washington, he now had lifelong immunity. During the war, smallpox beset communities as well as armies, to the point where, according to ChatGPT, Washington almost feared smallpox more than the British. Inoculation in those days was not the vaccines we know today, but a somewhat hair-raising process where material, aka gook, from the smallpox sores of others was inserted into one's skin or nose. Those inoculated usually developed a slight case of smallpox, except for some who died from it. But they were then immune. Despite the risks, Washington ordered inoculations for the entire Continental Army in 1777. The first program of its kind in American history, it helped keep the Army fit, or at least not sick from that particular disease, for fighting the British. Then, in 1796, British scientist Edward Jenner developed a safer method, vaccination as we know it today. It used cowpox, less dangerous to humans, instead of smallpox itself, to immunize against smallpox. By 1980, the disease was considered eradicated, wiped off the earth, a staggering achievement. In other words, vaccinations are not to be taken for granted or lightly tossed aside at the urging of one man, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. In the early part of the 1900s, polio, a disease that could lead to paralysis, was a scourge in the U.S. and across the world. At age 39, before his political career began, Franklin Roosevelt contracted it. His legs paralyzed, the ongoing story of his struggles brought polio research to the forefront. In fact, FDR, the man who will go on to have the most impressive resume in terms of accomplishments of anyone in the 20th century, it's tough to argue with that, helped found March of Dimes, the organization then dedicated to funding polio vaccine research. On a side note, it still exists to fund other disease research, but maybe it's time to update its name to the March of Benjamins. Talk about accomplishments. In 1955, Jonas Salk developed the polio vaccine. Salvation. At last, across a grateful nation, communities held vaccination days and children lined up for shots. Salk was treated like a hero, the man who saved children. I was only 5, but the celebration was so great it made a big impression on me. The news was everywhere. In fact, I vaguely remember my polio vaccination around 1955, my first of any kind. Besides a medical miracle, the polio vaccine was greeted as a great scientific achievement. Americans were all in with science in the 50s. Not only had it been integral to the U.S. helping win World War II, it was jump-started a couple of years later when Russia was the first to launch a satellite into space. The U.S. feared falling behind in both the space race and the arms race, as the Soviet Union was credited with possessing many more nuclear weapons than it actually had. Back then, STEM, as we know it, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, ruled. Knowledge and experts were respected, not scorned. Unlike today, when experts are often seen as elites who lord it over the salt of the earth rest of us. It's inconceivable to me how many of us, especially those my age with the same background of respect for vaccines and science, have become leery of vaccines and disrespect what used to be called pointy-headed intellectuals. Hey, if you're not smart, shut up and get smart. Then, in 1962, 9 years before the MMR vaccine was developed and made available, I contracted the measles at age 12. Confined to my bed for about a week, I experienced vision difficulties for the first time in my life and could neither read nor watch television. I was forced to listen to New York radio, which was pretty slim pickings at the time. In those days, when I recovered and returned to school, I experienced difficulty reading the blackboard, though, fortunately, my vision soon returned to normal. My point is, parents, you don't want to be putting your children through that by withholding vaccinations. As with long COVID, the after effects can be lifelong. Flash forward to the 1980s. Few know or remember, but there was a precursor to anti-vaxxing. Or perhaps it was just got more attention because it was more timely then. I followed the controversy with great interest as it played out. When the AIDS epidemic erupted, scientists determined that it was caused by what they called the human immunodeficiency virus, HIV. Well, you know that. Naturally, the discovery determined strategies for prevention and treatment. But it was challenged by some, such as a prominent Berkeley molecular biologist named Peter Duesberg. He made the case that while HIV existed, what instead caused AIDS was lifestyle factors such as recreational drug use, lifestyle factors, or an already compromised immune system. Not only that, he maintained that the first anti-HIV drug, AZT, further assaulted the immune system and caused it to collapse. At the time, I was a big fan of holistic nutritionist Gary Null, who subscribed to this theory. Well, certainly not anti-gay. He made the case that along with recreational drug use, frequent anal sex caused small tears to the rectum through which bacteria was admitted to the bloodstream. You have to admit, it made sense. Well, it did to me. Bear in mind, there was no left-right to any of this unless you count opposition to the medical establishment as left. Long story short, molecular biologist Duesberg turned out to be wrong, and the treatment skepticism he engendered is said to have led to hundreds of thousands of preventable deaths. Nutritionist Gary Null was my first source for vaccine skepticism. Nothing left-right about that either. It was just honest inquiry by a man who has been described as progressive, anti-corporate, and anti-establishment. Unfortunately, he clung to vaccine skepticism long after it passed its sell-by date. It was a big surprise to me when, decades later, vaccine skepticism migrated right as a MAGA, Maha Republican issue. How that happened is a story for another day. Today, please join me in celebrating vaccines and get this year's immunizations, if you can, that is.